Welcome to the Consultant and the Coach podcast. I'm here with my good friend Josh, who was making fun of me that I need my readers on.
I did not. You put them on without, I didn't say a word.
I couldn't see a thing.
Well,
but
that was, I didn't make fun of that. I just observed.
You know what though? Today is the day where it's one of those things. Last week's podcast was all about coaching others. About coaching ourselves. But it's a two-part series because if we learn how to coach ourselves or have someone else coach ourselves, we in turn, we're meant to coach and lead others.
Right.
And so what we're going to learn today is, hey, how do we coach others well? Because, the people who listen to this podcast, they're leaders. You can only be a leader. You can only be a great entrepreneur if you can replicate, if you can multiply. So what does it look like to coach others?
Right. And we're talking, I think, just to differentiate a little bit, we're not talking about the kind of executive coaching per se that you do with your clients, but then how you're training them to coach and lead the people they are
Absolutely.
leading, correct?
Absolutely. Okay. So, for example, in my company, I have between 70 and 75 employees. Well, it's one of those things. How does that translate down to the entire organization where you have one employee or you have 75 or more?
Right.
So I was thinking, the scripture verse for the day, I was thinking of Hebrews 5 verses 7 through 9. And this is, it's talking about Jesus. And the great thing about Hebrews is it's talking about why Jesus is so special. So the scripture verse is, in the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplication with loud cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverence. Now, this is Jesus' reverence. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. And being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him. And I was thinking of Jesus. I'm like, man, we need a good scripture of how we go about coaching others. But what I was thinking, Jesus, what makes him so special is he lived it for us. We don't have to say, what does that look like? No, Jesus, you're giving me that look.
No, keep going.
Yeah.
I'm listening.
Yeah.
I'm thinking.
But what I'm saying is Jesus was the perfect person.
Right.
But not only did he just say, hey, this is how it is. No, he literally walked the walk. He talked the talk. And what they're saying in Hebrews is he suffered as well too, which encourages us. And here's my leap. For someone to be a great coach, if we are to lead an organization, we first have to do the work. Jesus
that's where you're going.
That's where I'm going.
I was trying to figure out where you were going. My theological
did,
bells were going off. I was getting concerned. Okay.
Jesus did the work first.
Right.
A good leader needs to do the work first. So last week was, hey, how do we coach? How do we get coached?
Yeah.
Today, how do we coach others? So that's the leap.
Yeah. Well, and I think a good analogy might be, anybody who's usually a great coach from an athletics perspective, as another example, has been there and done that. Not all the time.
Not all the time, but frequently.
But usually you want to have a coach who, if you want to run a 4-minute mile, you have a coach who's run a 4-minute mile because they've suffered through that effort, right?
And frequently some of the best coaches are the athletes who suffered the most.
Yeah, exactly, because they have the most lessons to provide, right? Yeah. Yeah.
And, so that's, I say that to encourage others. Let's first do the work. Let's do the work ourselves. Let's figure things out so then we in turn can coach others in our organization. Yeah,
no, and I think that kind of ties back again to what we talked about for those who either remember or haven't heard it yet. Last week's around coaching yourself and how you go about getting the best out of yourself so that then you are prepared to pull the best out of those in your team.
Absolutely. So let's start with a pain point. I coach a lot of other people. And, as you're coaching, as you're consulting, you do a lot of coaching in the process of working with other people. What's a pain point that you've run into frequently when trying to coach others or trying to help organizations?
Yeah, no, and that takes me back. Some of you might have not heard all of our podcasts. So that kind of the genesis of our work here has been that Erik and I run together. And I think when we first started talking about this before even recording is as a coach, you happen to do a little consulting. As a consultant, I happen to do a little bit of coaching. And so I think that's part of what you're asking is naturally just there's two sides of that coin. I think the biggest thing is I find as a strategy consultant, especially, business development and growth is, there's always a big delta between what an entrepreneur wants to achieve and then what they can sort of convince their teams to actually go do, right? So there's always that gap between ideas and execution, and there's varying degrees of that, and there's various levels to that. It's not as black and white as that, because it depends on the size of the organization, it depends on the complexity of the organization. But there's usually a gap between the strategy or the idea and the actual execution, and of course there's multiple layers to that. But that's typically the space in which then I'm coaching, but also consulting, but also coaching leaders on how do they put their teams in positions to succeed, and deliver on what they want to achieve.
And so as we run into, there's always a degree of problems that we're trying to coach on and move towards. Our first talking point last week, to be coachable, number one is honesty and candor. We need that, our coach that's coaching us. But likewise, as we coach others, the number one point is to be candid with them. And the reason why is, I think of the people that I have so respected who have coached me and taught me, it's because they were candid with me. They were willing to tell me the brutal truth in a nice way, not as a jerk. And so, why is it that honesty and candor are so important as we coach others?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think the opposite is even an easier way to tackle that question. It's almost like it's easier to know what you're talking about when you think about the opposite of that, because I think a lot of companies and a lot of cultures do not value honesty and candor. And so think about how damaging it is when you have that environment, right? That almost makes the case for why honesty and candor matter. I mean, it's important, but it's easier to define it in my sense. Maybe that's just my experiences, but by thinking about the opposite, right? Because most, at least environments I've been in, tend to have at least some element of the opposite, where there's not a value in honesty and candor, or an ability to be honest with each other, or the words, or the safety. And nobody likes working in those environments.
No, they don't.
They're painful. You don't know where you stand. You don't know how to get better. You don't know what your job is.
And when there's not that, it's it might be safer in the short term. And what I mean by that is, they're not going to bring out hard truths in the short term. But the problem is, there are underlying issues that never get treated. It's like, well, maybe I won't have cancer if I never look for it.
Right.
It's always going to keep growing. Cancer, I don't want to say never disappears, but infrequently just disappears.
Yeah. Well, and it's an interesting twin, I think, to this is also what I would say misaligned incentive structures.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right? Because financial and otherwise, because when you have well-aligned incentives, then honesty follows. Because we have a reason to be. We're on the same team. When you don't have aligned incentives, it's much, much harder to have an honest culture. In my experience, because that's where CEOs basically begin to surround themselves with people who are protecting them, because the people protecting them don't want to screw up the gravy train they have, and so they don't want to tell the CEO the truth.
No,
because it would mess up their particular incentives, right? If it's not aligned properly.
And it might keep the gravy train short term. Yeah. Long term, it will blow up, because it's you're driving towards a cliff. Don't tell me I'm driving towards a cliff. You're going to go off the cliff.
But if no one either is going to be there and or has any reason financially to steer that train away from that cliff, they won't ever be honest about it.
No, they won't.
Yeah. So
the number one, as we're getting coached, but also as we coach others, we've got to be honest and candid with them when we coach them. What we do, we reflect. And now that's hard, because when we're candid with someone, it can kind of mess things up because you're kind of rocking the boat. So how much do you do it, and what does that look like? And it's really hard. It's like, hey, Josh, I want you to coach me, but I'm not going to be honest with you. Well, how can you coach me if I'm not going to be honest with you? It's a two-way street.
Yeah.
It's got to go on the base level is trust.
Right.
Now, the second point, as I coach others, and I think for those of our listeners, as we coach others, one of the best things to do, number 2, is reflection on the individual we're coaching. So we can't just go in and say, hey, here are my 3 points.
Yeah.
Every individual is different. And I believe for those that I coach over, I also pray over. I also, what does it look like? What might be issues? And this is something you're really, really good at, because you'll be working on a project and you don't just all of a sudden come up with an answer. How long does it come up, or how long does it take sometimes, and why?
Oh, it can take a long time. Depends on the complexity of the problem and the people involved. I mean, it can sometimes take far longer than it should. Or at least you have one example. Actually, that's not true. You should have an answer hypotheses pretty quick, and then I start testing them pretty quickly and start going, what about this? Either asking the person or in my own mind, trying to probe on particular things.
And then you get to it.
And then you get to
reflect on it.
Eventually. Yeah.
Whether it's reflection on a problem or reflection as we're coaching others. Why do they do what they do?
Yeah. Well, and that's where, to your point about individuals, it matters, because, we've talked a lot on this podcast about, development and what sort of influences where we are as a leader. Kind of who we are today sort of reflects where we've been. And I've worked with, I remember talking about consulting. I was consulting with the executive director of a nonprofit who was the founder and was having the founder syndrome of having trouble getting out of his particular role because he didn't need to be in it anymore, but then he couldn't see his way out of it. But as I got to understand who he was and his own background, in many cases dysfunction of how he ended up where he was, successful in one regard, complete mess in the other regard, like we all are. I started reflecting back to him who he was and my sort of observations on what he was challenged with. He was surprised, I think, at the depth of insight it was able to produce for him in terms of like just giving him a mirror, basically, right? Even as a consultant, I was basically mirroring back to him who he was and what I was seeing. He was somewhat, I think, appreciative and surprised at the way in which I was able to basically be a therapist back to him, unintentionally. I was just trying to help the organization.
And a good therapist or a good coach, what they really do is they reflect. And the more I look at myself in the mirror, is my hair the way it should be, right? Did I, clean up properly? That's the role of a good mirror. And as we are coaching others, we need to reflect on them.
Yeah.
And we need to. I was coaching someone, and I've this client's been coming back to me with a number of problems, and frequently I have found the main problem is not typically the main problem. It's typically a sub-problem or tertiary problem, and this has been going on for a couple of months now, and I was really reflecting. And I finally, by reflecting, figured it out. Of course, it was a tertiary issue of something else, and frequently it was a communication problem. The way this client was communicating. And now we can work on this issue, because what we thought was the issue really wasn't the issue. I mean, it was the issue.
Right.
But it wasn't the main issue, because there was a communication problem that kept rearing its head.
Right.
And we're like, okay, we can work on this now. But I was only able to get there as a coach because I kept reflecting, kept praying over this individual. I'm like, there's got to be a reason why these problems keep coming up.
Right.
So, second, reflection. Third, a good coaching process is coactive. And let me define coactive. 50-50. Coach has got to put their effort in. Likewise, the employee or team member has to put the effort in as well, too.
Yeah.
So what do you think when I say that, when something's 50-50?
Well, this is a funny example, actually. I was thinking about this. I won't get into the specifics to betray the individual, but you'll appreciate this example. In our life team, one time somebody brought an example, and they were talking about, and that sort of, I say 50-50 because coaching happens there too, as we talked about life teams. Go back and check that one out if you haven't heard it yet. Where individuals are investing in each other and sort of reflecting back what each other needs. And as you might remember, what this individual was bringing up this issue where they were sort of trying to align the economic incentives and the way they did their payments and sort of hemming and hawing over sort of what had become a bit of a difficult issue to tackle, right? Because people didn't like the change. It wasn't about the money as much as how it reflected his opinion of their value as the CEO versus the staff. And I was listening, and a little bit I could pick together, and this is like, 10 minutes? And I said back to him, I asked him a couple of questions. And I finally said, so, again, 50-50. He had to put all the work in of like actually articulating himself, which is all the work. And then basically, effectively in this scenario where we're supporting each other, but effectively coaching, I said, tell me again what one of these scenarios costs you. And it was a couple of bucks or something. I said, how many times a month is this scenario happening? I don't know, 20 times a month. I said, so you're telling me you got this big problem. People are upset. And this is only costing you $50 a month? And he just looks at me. The look on his face was utter shock of, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Right? But it wasn't bad. Like, that's just what a coach is supposed to do, right? Is to help you see through the mess.
But what happened was, this person was putting in all the work. Yep. And not all the work. They were putting in a good portion of the work. Right. You were actively involved. You were actively thinking as well.
Had a history of like obviously spending time together over a couple years.
And you put the work in as well too. And you came up with a solution because you both worked at it. Right. Imagine if this person did all the work and you were just listening and not actively, then you wouldn't have had that insight. Right. I've also seen other people, the coach does all the work and the other person's like, okay, hold the fishing pole for me. I'm not going to fish, but I want you to catch a fish for me.
When the fish comes in,
exactly, and it's a coactive, process. Right. Now, so third is it's coactive. Fourth is as we coach others, and this is hard for those of us that are really, really gifted in certain areas. It is impossible to hit on everything, and I've seen some coaches, they're just too tough on others. Is what I mean. Is like you'll see someone, and there's literally like 10 things to work on. I'll pick on a nice safe thing. When I'm coaching cross country, as I work with a 7 or 8 year old, they're 7 or 8. They are a long ways away from being an elite runner. I'm not going to say, well, Johnny, you have everything that you need to work on. Right. I'm going to pick one thing. Right. And when we worked with less experienced people, pick one thing and just dial down on that one thing. Yeah. Once we get that, then go on to the second one. So as we worked, we cannot hit on everything. Right. And some people are like, you're being too hard on someone. Yeah. You truly are. We cannot hit on everything.
Can you talk about how you've gone about how you pick the one thing? How do you pick the one thing? I mean, if you got 10.
Yes. Typically I will go, what will move the needle the fastest in the shortest amount of time?
For whatever goals you
For whatever goal. So from a brain perspective, I'm looking for a quick dopamine hit. Because when people hit a quick goal, it helps for the next goal. I'm not going to go, hey, I have this huge project, and if we do all this, you'll be rewarded in 2 years, and that's your first goal. No, we're going to go for something really short, quick, and easy. And that's what we're going to shoot for.
So maybe not the biggest impact to the organization, but the shortest, quickest win.
Because we're looking for a quick dopamine hit, and then we're going to slowly move up. Or even as we have larger milestone or larger rocks that we're working on, we're looking at shorter, quicker milestones as we get in that general direction. Because I've seen a lot of people, they'll get really excited over something, but they can't maintain that intensity day after day after day over the course of 3 years. Can't be done. But just be aware, we cannot hit everything at one time. And I think people understand it, but it's good to be reminded, what's the one thing we're going for now?
Yeah. No, and in consulting, very similar, right? As an organization, what do we have to go achieve in the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months to survive and advance the goals. So it's very similar.
So as we talk short term, hey, you can't hit on everything. Go for a quick dopamine hit. But the last thing, as we coach others, and this is kind of the end goal that we're looking for, is as I coach others and as we coach others, the end goal is a general awareness in a coaching relationship. So for example, as I go into a coaching relationship, my goal is not to coach this person the rest of their life. That would be that's not the goal. Right. The goal is we want them to eventually be aware where they can self-check. You know what? I remember I learned about this issue and I've read that person's body language and they're not tracking with me.
Yeah.
Therefore, I'm going to read their body language. Hey, what did I just say? Or hey, it looks, you look the other way. Is something else on your mind? How do we teach others to get the self-awareness in their leadership, on projects that they're working on? What does that look like? So, in other words, what systems are we creating to help our clients, team members develop? And you're great at creating systems. What does that look like? To get them to the point where you're setting them to go do it themselves.
Yeah, in terms of consulting work, that's usually tied to feedback loops and metrics, right? It's how do you begin to build some level of awareness that are sort of in process or leading indicators, right, of achieving the goals and or performance levels, and in product development language, I think it's just building product feature kind of guardrails that allow for teams to deliver faster, right, with the right level of insight on how they're doing, and there's operational ways to look at that. I think it's important, right, is to help people see. And either if it's immediate feedback, like you were talking about, like facial expressions and learning to read body language in particular situations, or if it's looking at across a executive leadership team or looking across operational. There's plenty of ways, but I think it's really about trying to set up those feedback loops that allow you to be aware of current scenarios, whether it's business or interpersonal or leadership, whatever those things are.
And the general awareness, I would also say the next step is as we become more and more aware, and we want our clients to become more aware, is I'd love to see them become aware of their own mistakes. And mistakes are totally okay.
Yeah.
Because mistakes, hey, that's a calibration shot. I've seen some, I can never make a mistake. That's got to be miserable. Yeah. Everyone makes mistakes. So then you're hiding everything. We go back to the whole honesty thing.
Yeah, and then you're at the top of the funnel again.
And now we start all over again from point 1 down to point 5. So, once we get that general awareness, hey, I'm okay making mistakes. Hey, did I read you right? No, actually, I was thinking this. Oh, okay. So in other words, you were just hungry for pushing off lunch 2 hours that had nothing to do with your feelings towards. Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah.
I misread that. In a good relationship, the coach and client and vice versa, the manager and the employee, they've got to have that good awareness of just working together. And then you have a heck of a team. You see this with like a quarterback and a wide receiver that just seamlessly get each other.
Right. Yeah. No. And I think to encourage folks too, this isn't a linear process. No. I suspect. Right. As you're moving through these, people will have other dynamic impacts, life, both work and personal related, that will sort of set them back, right, in this process individually, and or as a leader, you'll always have turnover in your group of, you start to get this person right, and then another person has something else happen, and or you bring someone new on. So there's always a give and take, I think, here to encourage folks. We've tried to lay it out simply, but it is a messy process to coach others. So don't hold yourself, don't be too hard on yourself. It's tough because it's certainly a work in progress, as we all are.
Absolutely. And the cool thing is we're made for relationships.
That's right.
We're made to have these, sometimes, it's so hard. Yeah, we're made for this.
Yep.
And if anything, it encourages me. It's probably not going to be automated. You can only do so much.
The relationships will not be. All the steps in between might be. We can figure out how to do that. But
So hey, as we coach others, honesty, candor, reflection, process is coactive. It's impossible to hit on everything, and let's work generally towards awareness as we coach others. So hey, next podcast, when is it time to change jobs?
Yeah, good topic. I hear that a lot from people I work with.
A lot of people who will contact me, hey, I'm considering switching jobs.
Oh, yeah.
And they will utilize me because I'm safe. Hey, I want to go through all the scenarios. Is it time to switch from the safe job to the riskier job that has a much higher top end, or I'm willing to step out, or what does that look like?
Yep.
Hey, this is the time to look.
There is plenty of opportunity out there for those who are willing to look for it. That's for sure.
Indeed. So, hey, until then, when is it time to change jobs? But hey, between now and then, go to theconsultantcoach.com, reach out to us, and we're always here and absolutely love talking with you guys.
Sounds good.
Okay. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.